Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you, and thank you so much for taking time on a Friday to join us. I'm really excited to host this conversation, and I hope that it'll be as engaging and participatory as possible. For those of you that are on Zoom, certainly feel free to use the chat just so that you remember that everyone will see your comments. So you want to be mindful of that, but thank you for joining us on Zoom as well. So my name is Faria Khan. I'm the co-director of Asian American Studies here at Penn. And I want to just do a quick plug for our minor. We have these lovely brochures that tell you a little bit about the course requirements that is needed for this for the minor. It is advanced registration, as many of you know. This is the time where you're probably thinking about what courses you want to take during spring 22. And what I would love to say is that, I want to remind you that we have two exciting courses coming up in the spring. We had the pleasure of listening to Stephanie George yesterday, who is teaching a brand new course for us. It's called Sonic Reverberations of Asian America. That'll be a course on Asian American music, thinking about it through race and ethnicity. Stephanie is a ethnomusicologist, so please look into that course. And then the course that I will be teaching, which is a new one as well, is based on this conversation that we'll have. It's called American Race, a Philadelphia Story. You'll see that it's offered Tuesday, Thursdays, 12 p.m. So I hope that you'll be able to take a look at that as well. And I want to pass out our spring course bookmarks in case anyone has any questions. Oh, time. Yeah, that's great. Okay.
I want to pick that one as your name.
Oh, but then we can't see.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's
and then
great.
when Ben comes to her. Yes.
Okay.
How would we see ourselves? I don't know.
Yeah. Great. So I'm thrilled to welcome my dear colleagues, Dr. Ameena Ghaffar-Kucher and Van Sam, who's joining us via Zoom. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us today and engaging with us in this conversation. Before I let them introduce themselves, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the course. So this is the first time I'm offering it, and it will be exciting, and it will be a new challenge, right? And I wanted to, the reason I'm teaching it is I wanted to explore what is race. Obviously, race is an important issue in the US, right? And if we think about it historically, we recognize that various disciplines have thought and taught about race in different ways. Various disciplines have also used different kinds of methodologies to search and examine issues of race. So in this course, I wanted to offer various perspectives on race through an interdisciplinary lens, right? How do sociologists think about race? How do folks in urban studies think about race? How do folklorists use race in examining certain practices or traditions? And so this course does begin with an interdisciplinary approach to its readings, okay? And I'm thrilled to also say that I'm very grateful to partners in urban studies, in sociology, in Latin American Latinx studies, in Africana studies, as well as in South Asia studies, who have cross-listed this course, okay? So it is really important for us to begin to have the tools to think through race historically and through an interdisciplinary lens. But one of the problems in thinking about that is that often those approaches are very community specific, right? And so in this course, I hope that the goal will be to about particular ways that issues are racialized and think about issues of race, right? So both things. But, you know, one of the things is that in doing so, in thinking about race, through particular lenses, we often fail to see the impact of laws, policies, and practices, right, that actually link particular communities together, right? And so I hope that in this course, through this interdisciplinary lens, we can actually see ways that communities are racialized or marginalized in similar ways. But it wasn't enough for me to just offer a broad spectrum of readings. I really wanted us as a class community to also think about the city that we live and work in, right, which is Philadelphia, obviously. And so the course will also offer a series of guest speakers that are working on issues of race in the city. So as we read about race, right, we will also then meet individuals that are working on those very things, okay? Community activists and leaders in the city that will bring different kinds of perspectives on the ground to us as a class. And so the class will also explore race, racialization, and the city through our community leaders. And so I want to begin today's conversation by introducing our guest speakers. I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little bit about their work here at Penn, as well as in the city. So Van, would you like to begin?
Yes.
Okay, we can't hear you. Why can't we hear Van?
Oh. Hi.
Oh, now we can hear you.
All right, great. Hi everyone. My name is Van. Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry I can't be on campus today with you all. I go by they, them pronouns, and I am currently the senior community defense coordinator at VietLead. I have been working with high school students and also Southeast Asian people who are impacted by detention and deportation because they're formally incarcerated in the city of Philadelphia since 2017. And yeah, I am also a graduate student in the public health program at Penn right now. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Van. And we're thrilled. I mean, we wish you were here with us too, but we're thrilled that you could join us via Zoom still. Ameena?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Ameena Ghaffar-Kucher. I am a senior lecturer at the Graduate School of Education, and I'm originally from Pakistan, and I've been living in the United States for the last 21 years. And that's going to be a significant piece of the story that I'm going to tell about sort of how I came to understand race in the United States, because I don't think it's just a given, like it's something you really have to learn and teach yourself about and learn from others as well. So I'm really excited to be here and to learn from all of you as well, because obviously I've come to this work from a slightly different perspective, especially since I grew up in Hong Kong, moved to Pakistan when I was in my teenage years, and then moved to Germany for college. So it's been like moving westwards is always my joke, except not really. And I lived in New York City for a good part, up until about 2015. So I moved to New York in 2000, was there till 2015. And that period of my life has really influenced the work that I do now. And that's what I'll be sharing about. So thank you for coming on a Friday afternoon. For those of you who are in the room, I can tell you will be rewarded by the end of this, not for my talk, but because there's some good people there.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I mean, it's very sad that we can't actually eat together, but we do have lunch, so please do take it as you leave. So I'll pose this question, and I don't know if Ameena or Sam, Van, you want to start off with, talking a little bit about how race impacts your work.
Yeah, I can, yeah, share. I think race definitely impact our work, right? I think so, especially in the work of fighting against detention and deportation of Southeast Asian people, right? We always talk about race as because, you know, because of the war in Southeast Asia, right? What commonly known as the Vietnam War, our people got displaced, got killed, and that's why a lot of us came here as refugees and immigrants, right? And then because of the racialized policies in the United States, that's why a lot of our people ended up where they are, right? The war on drugs, the war on poverty, you know, the cutting up welfare that really impacted how Southeast Asian people oftentimes get caught up, right, in the 80s and 90s in the school to prison to deportation pipeline. A lot of our folks get you know, get caught up in the incarceration system that is extremely racialized. And then, right, and then they serve their time, they get out, and then this really racist system of like that constantly view us as a people of another place, right? Of constantly viewing Asian people as not belonging here, that pushes this administration and administration before that to continuously deport our people, right? So I think race impact our work tremendously. However, we also use race as a way for us to really help our people understand that actually you shouldn't blame yourself for what you're going through, right? Because this whole system is so racialized. That is why, yeah, the responsibility, right? You don't deserve to be locked up. You don't deserve to be deported, and you don't deserve to be separated from your family. And so using that to reframe that actually is a system, is a racialized system that is beyond you, I think has helped us be able to work with the people that we're working with, right, to really change the system that's impacting them.
Great, thank you, Van. Hi, welcome.
Well, I don't know if I have told you, but I was here 4 days ago. Sweating,
Last
rushing,
week, yes.
and I was like, today is the day. And then today's actually the day. I apologize, friends. I'm sorry.
Well, everyone was welcome, Dr. Christian Cortez, and our special guest.
Yes, this is Imran.
Thanks for coming. All right, so we're just introducing ourselves, so I'll turn it to you.
Give her a breath.
Oh, yeah, would you like some water?
I'm okay. I appreciate that. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am Christian Cortez. I am the director of the Casa, Latina. I am newly minted PhD, having finished my doctoral studies technically this past May. Thank you.
It's a big deal.
Wow. And so I identify as Afro-Latina, Afro-Puerto Rican. I'm first generation. On all the levels, I come to Penn with my research, my doctoral research as a lens for the work that I'm doing now. And so my dissertation questions were really trying to understand, oh, yes, here. Trying to understand Blackness from a place of joy, a place of value, not from a deficit perspective or from, deficit and negative perspective. What I had found, both through my personal experience and my academic experience, is that we often enter the conversation around Blackness and Latinidad at the Latinx spaces. Latinx people are anti-Black. And here are all the ways they're anti-Black before we start talking about counterexamples and how we can disrupt the anti-Blackness. And so I knew that I wanted to start that conversation differently and enter from a place of Black joy, right? Where this is, there's truth to this, right? That there's anti-Blackness within the Latinx community, but that is not the whole truth, right? And so I really set out on a course to find examples where people were not starting from that place. They were saying, let's affirm our Blackness. Let's, we're proud of our Blackness, and these are the various ways that we do this. And so I was trying to document how Latinx families, particularly mothers, design places that are Black affirming for their children, and thinking a little bit more broadly about like how we define family, how we define mothering, how we define community, to also look at like practices within activist community spaces and how those are also family units and how they do similar types of mothering work with the people that come to their space. So that's a little bit about me and kind of my research, all stemming from my personal experience and things that I'm currently working through myself. But I think that that is always a good motivation for continuing to ask the questions and do the work. So, thank you for the invitation. And again, I'm so sorry I was late.
We're here. And we're thrilled. So I had asked a question about how race impacts or informs your work, and Van offered a little bit about their work with VietLead. And so I don't know if Ameena or Christian want to go next.
Well, I'll give you a breath. So how's that? So as I mentioned earlier, I'm an immigrant. I moved to the United States in the winter of or spring of 2000, and I was pretty clueless about race in the United States. Really didn't understand things. And obviously, I had grown up watching a lot of American films, but it was the first time I'd come to the United States. And I will tell you, it took me quite a while, and I still haven't figured it out. But it really took me a long time to really understand structural racism, right? I mean, I think that was the big thing. I understood individual biases. I had absolutely experienced that growing up in the different countries that I had lived in, especially being in a colonial context. Hong Kong was still a British colony when I was living there, moving back to Pakistan, which was a former British colony, moving to Germany, where they had their own colonial baggage and other kinds of baggage, and then moving to the United States. So that individual bias was not something new to me, but I will tell you, it took me a long time to understand what structural racism is and the way that it impacts different communities. And so I never set out to actually do race work. That was never sort of something that I had wanted to do. When I moved to the United States, I'm a school psychologist by training. That's what I thought I was going to do. And then I thought at some point, my husband is German, that we would move back to Europe and live there or whatever. And then life has a weird way of happening. Life is what happens while you're busy making those plans, in the wise words of John Lennon. And so what happened was, September 11th happened 18 months after I moved here. And that changed the course of my life in so many ways. And it changed the kind of research I was doing. In 2003, I enrolled in a doctoral program. And I initially was going to do work back in Pakistan, but again, starting to work in immigrant communities, going and doing research there, completely changed my dissertation topic, and ended up working with Pakistanis in New York City, youth from working class backgrounds in particular. And even then, I really didn't quite understand. I thought these kids, they've grown up in the United States, and they would really think of themselves as Pakistani Americans, these hyphenated identities, blending, creating these new identities, and they were like, no, I didn't even know that was an option for me. The only thing I think is available to me is a Muslim identity. And it was interesting because this is in the context of 9/11 right now, and how things are shifting and how that really changed these young people's lives, who were in middle school or high school when 9/11 happened. That's what my age group was. And I was in the school in Brooklyn. It was an ethnographic study. So I was there for about 3.5 years. So I met a lot of kids in that time period. And when I wrote my dissertation, even then, I don't think I understood this, even though I'd seen, both my brothers lived in the United States, what they've gone through with special registration and then mass deportations, and that was impacting the community I was studying, but I still didn't quite get what was happening until I graduated with my degree was actually teaching. Somehow got roped into teaching a class on race, which I had no business to be teaching, let me tell you, given the background I have just shared with you all. But here I find myself teaching this class, and I had a guest speaker who, I remember it was fall 2009. That's when I learned about critical race theory. So that was after I've been living in this country for 9 years. I may have been introduced it during my doctoral studies, but I just kind of went over my head. But really kind of understood it. It gave me a sort of vocabulary to understand what was happening and to understand those different levels of racism that actually exist. And so the work I've been doing since there, I'm a curriculum person, I'm an education person. I've done curriculum work on anti-bullying curriculum for South Asian American youth. That was one of the earlier projects. And the most recent project that Priya, Dr. Khan is actually part of as well, is the Teaching Beyond September 11th curriculum, where we're really looking at how the last 20 years have impacted various communities, not just Muslim communities, but Arab communities, communities that are mistaken to be Muslim, just a variety of communities that have been impacted by this, looking at issues of deportation, of issues of wars, like the ongoing wars that the United States has been fighting for the last 20 years, issues of representation. And some of the really exciting things has been working with young people and just learning from them about how they have been pushing back and just the changes that I've observed over the past couple of years. And I promise I'm going to wrap up my thoughts in another couple of seconds. I think what gives me hope is one of the things that I think has really shifted is that we've moved away from these silos of people working on, issues of anti-Blackness, issues affecting, the Southeast Asian American community, the Latinx community, these different communities. And you're really seeing people coming together and saying that our solidarity, our salvation is joint work. And it's young people who are leading that. And that gives me a little bit of hope. And I didn't talk about the research I've been doing, but I also just finished a project before your study, a national study about Muslim Americans and civic engagement from across the United States. We did focus groups in 13 states and DC, or 12 states in DC. So I can certainly talk about that as well. Great, thanks.
So thank you for where you ended, because I think that's such an important point in thinking about the intersectionality of places where all of our various experiences actually meet, right, and overlap. My research begins that work, right, in thinking about particularly how Latinidad is not one thing, right? It is many things. It's an identity that oftentimes gets pigeonholed to look and sound a particular way and have a particular life experience, when in reality, it runs a spectrum of looks and sounds and experiences that often get missed by the tropes that were fed in popular media. And so my work at its beginning here is really trying to begin to slowly tap away at that by looking at Blackness as not only a lived experience that has to do with how one presents phenotypically, but how Blackness is more than that. It exceeds that, in the words of Nicole Cleveland, right? It's in excess of a skin tone, a facial feature, again, a sound, right? I'm gonna just keep dropping. All of a sudden, I'm inspired to draw authors, but there are some really amazing people doing this work right now, like Jonathan Rosa, who's thinking about the ratiolinguistics, right? The way that race is superimposed onto language and vice versa. But again, my work is trying to chip away at thinking of Blackness as a phenotypic marker, but is a practice, and the way that these practices are viewed into people's daily lives. This is how Blackness is taught and learned. And that's what I have been, the questions I've been asking, trying to understand how Blackness is a practice built into, passed down, and built into how people interact and relate to one another more than what they, again, how they present. But thinking about this piece on intersectionality a little bit more broadly, now being here and having just finished my own graduate school extended tenure as a graduate student, it took me, what, 8 years to get PH finished. But that is 8 years on top of 3 years of graduate school as a master's student and 4 years as an undergrad. And navigating higher education for so long, you begin to see what you were alluding to earlier were the structures, the way racism is not just at the interpersonal level, but it's built into the very structures of education in this country specifically as we come to experience it. And so all of that time navigating university after university, I saw that it wasn't unique to one place, that it was insidious in that way, that it was, you could be here at an elite private institution or at the largest state public university in this country and still find the people on the campus will look very different. The way they approach their philosophies on education are very different, yet fundamentally they're all very similar in how racism is built into their structures and how they were never built for people like us, right? And that us being very inclusive to think about anyone who has been excluded for whatever reason from having an equitable educational experience. And so now being here at Penn, I've been working with some of my friends who are also scholars and thinking about how do we change this for the people who are coming through now and who are coming through after. And so last semester, we piloted a program called HEAL, which is Healing, Empowerment, and Love. And it was publicized as a program for graduate student women, identify women, thinking kind of broadly about people who may identify as a woman for a variety of reasons, in a variety of ways, but women of color, right? And so being very intentional, like even though the program was coming out of Casa, Latina, this is not for just for folks who identify as Latinx, right? This is an experience that we share as marginalized people in a predominantly white institution, that academia is really hard. And it's not, I tell folks this all the time when they're talking to me about considering pursuing a PhD. It's like, it's going to test you in all of these ways that you can't even fathom right now, and that none of them have to do with the academic aspect of it, because you are more than capable of meeting the academic rigor that's going to be expected of you in your program. It's all of these other things. And sometimes it happens slowly over time. Sometimes it's in your face, but all in all, it wears on you. And so trying to create a space, HEAL, that begins that healing process is a source of empowerment and really a community of care, right? For folks who are going through this, so that you know you're not the only one. You know that there are people that you may not see them regularly on campus because we're so siloed in our different engineering is here, the law school's over there, all of these things. But you know that somewhere out here there's someone who understands how hard this is. And if I need to, I have that person to reach out to. We have regular meetings in the spring. We hope to bring that back in the spring. Just as another way, like the research feeds into a practical resolution, if you will, for some of these questions as we continue to wrestle with them, collect the data, and try to answer, right? Some really unanswerable questions.
So I'm intrigued by all of your comments, and I wanted to turn a little bit to this idea that in hearing all three of you, it seems like there's, in what ways can you separate yourself from your work on race? And is that possible? Is that desirable?
Why should you?
Yeah. But how does that then impact your work?
Makes you more intentional, right? Like it makes you really think about who's being included, who's not being included, because you've experienced that. You've experienced that not being excluded, what that feels like, and being really intentional. And the curriculum that I mentioned, the Teaching September 11th, Beyond September 11th curriculum, the people we invited to actually be part of that, I really thought very hard about who we wanted to bring in and what they would bring. So it's all people of color. It's all, they either identify, sorry, that's not correct. They either identify people of color or as Muslim, because these are two of the largest communities that have been impacted by post 9/11 policies. And that was really intentional. And I don't think somebody who has experienced these things would maybe take the care to amplify those voices, because that's what needs to be done. There are a lot of amazing people doing incredible work in this area who don't fit in those categories and or who don't identify in those ways. And that was really important to me to be mindful of that, and also to think about it's not just Muslims who've been impacted by 9/11. There are all these different communities. So we partnered with the Sikh Coalition because Sikh people have definitely been impacted really terribly by 9/11 policies. We really thought about just people who are out there doing the work, activists, and just making sure that it's a very full representation, even of the Muslims who are part of the project, making sure that it's an incredibly diverse range of people who identify as Muslims. So that was, I think that's what being so engaged in that work is helping me recognize those things, I think. I don't know, Van, what's your something?
Van, would you like to add something?
Yeah. Hi everyone again. I think because
Oh,
we
wait,
live.
Okay,
Oh,
we missed the first part, sorry.
There's a delay, I think. So.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Can you all hear me now? Okay, cool. I think because we live in a racialized society, at least from my perspective, I don't think it'll benefit our work if we take out the consideration of race, or we don't think about race, right? Let me give an example, right? We work with high school students who are Southeast Asian in Philadelphia to basically educate them about the history of Southeast Asian deportation and how did the reality of our community looks the way it looks, right? And I think it's really important because they are Southeast Asian people. They understand the context. They carry the intergenerational trauma from a displaced people who were displaced by US militarism in Southeast Asia, right? To be able to understand this work and how it impacts our community, right? But if we take race out of this context and out of this understanding, then I think
it wouldn't really benefit our work, right? And there's a lot of power dynamic too, right? So if like there's a non-Southeast Asian person that comes in and want to do the work, but don't really understand all of these contexts and all of these trauma that our community carries, and just show up and be like, hey, I'm here to help, and I'm here to help free people, great. But I think there's also certain power dynamics, right? If someone who's East Asian, who come from a community has a lot of resources, who have contributed to the oppression of Southeast Asian people, and show up and do that, right? I think we must take into consideration of race and how all of that impacted our reality, right? I don't think we live in a post-racial society in the way that we have the liberty to just be whoever we are, right? Even if we wanted to. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Van. I think those are really important points. Krista, did you want to-
Yeah, I think, you asked the question and I didn't immediately have a response because I feel like we've been programmed to question, should we be doing this work in our own communities if our experience mirrors the people, or the questions are coming from a more personal place, that's not real research or real scholarship. It's not objective, and that's the point of research, right? Is to be able to provide an answer to something that is without a doubt, right? Without any kind of doubt. So the question gives me pause because that was so often kind of the line, but why? Because it gave people a license to go into our communities and research us, right? Where we didn't have the agency to push back against it because we were told that this is for the good of all people, right?
Exactly, yeah.
For the building of this knowledge. And these are the people who can do that, and it's not us, right? And so I love the immediate pushback on the question because it's true. It's like we need to be asking these questions. We need to be doing this work. It needs to be inspired by our personal experience because I think that we are able to have a richer interrogation and then a richer product at the end. But I also, like, with that, there's just a little bit of word of caution. It's like, just because you're from a community does not mean you're infallible, right? It doesn't mean that you can get away with only not digging deep enough, right? I think as scholars of color, we have to constantly make sure that we are trying to get all of those voices heard. Because my experience as an Afro-Latina is not going to be the next person's or the next person. And I would be remiss to assume that all people have walked through the world like I have. And so it's being mindful of that as well. But I think it's important that we are the ones at the front, to tell the story. Exactly.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I'm mindful of time, and I want to be sure that we have we have an opportunity for all of you, whether you're with us in the room or on Zoom, to ask questions as well. I mean, I have questions, but I'll open it up to see if others have questions too. It could be anything.
Chat. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's a question.
Okay. Michelle, I hope you answered. Questions or thoughts? Or things that you've been wondering about, or maybe, Yeah. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry. My name is Ameena. I'm an HSP student. In here, I also take my course about race. And so I was wondering if we don't have to detach ourselves from the view of race or from our research about race, then is it gonna also detach the objectivity within what we observe about race in like we haven't really been in a post-racial world. So is it gonna like devalue the objectivity into the subjectivity if we don't really put ourselves from from our background?
Okay, I don't know if anyone wants to.
I'm happy to take that one because when I came to give my job talk here, somebody in the job talk in the audience actually asked me the question, how can you be objective in your research if it's your Pakistani, you're doing work with Pakistani? And coming back to your point, there's a lot of nuance in the Pakistani immigrant community, and I don't know everything about them. But my real answer is there's no objective research of any kind. Like even this morning, my students were like, you know, they were talking about how they seek refuge in Stata, which is a statistical software, because Stata gives you the right answers. And I was like, do you think that the stuff you're putting, where do you think that data is coming from that you're putting in, and the regressions that you're running, the choices that you're making, those are not objective choices. Those are subjective choices. And a researcher is always coming in with some sort of point of view, some sort of background that is going to influence the kinds of questions you ask, the kind of data you collect. So yes, I think we get a lot more pushback when we are, you know, seen as insiders, whether we are or not, because I think that's really troubling as well, because I think, you know, it depends on the situation. But I think that's part of also the system, and I think that Dr. Cortez was alluding to earlier as well, is it's a system that's making us sort of almost devalue our own work because we are coming from that more nuanced perspective, right? And so I think it's really important to remember that it's not like we have all the answers. We don't know everything. We certainly don't. But there are certain things that we will be more likely to look for because of our experiences in these communities and our understanding. And we still might make mistakes and miss things. And that's okay. That's why we want the multiplicity of research. But I guess the real, for me, the short answer is there's no objective research. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Not true.
Yeah. Van or Kristen, if you wanted to respond as well.
Sorry, I couldn't really hear the questions clearly earlier.
Oh, okay. Van could not hear the question. I don't know if you have a chance to repeat it or.
So I was asking about whether if we like detach ourselves from our background, from our racial background in this term of like research around racial thing, is it gonna like lose the objectivity, lessen the objectivity of our research and the result that we discover?
Got it. Yeah, I agree with the answer earlier. I don't think any research is subjective. I think objectivity is a thing that that has been often used by academia to erase like the reality of a lot of our people, and I think there can be multiple truths, right? And I think that, yeah, I think, you know, as a student, as a community organizer, I think we all come in with biases, and we all have lived experience that affect our research. And I don't think the removal of our understanding of race or the removal of our identity will in the quest of being objective is the question that we should be asking per se. I think we really need to define or redefine the definition of objective, right? Like what are we being objective for? Can we really be objective as people of color in the United States, right? When we talk about race, when so much of these bigger systems are constantly impacting our life. Yeah.
Yes, all of it.
Thanks for the question. Because I know, we grapple with these things because of the expectations and because we're taught not to put ourselves in research, not use I, use the third person type of thing.
Yes.
And the thing is, sure, right, you have a point of view.
And everything that you read has a point of view. And they were comfortable with saying it, and you should too.
Like many variables in it, many factors.
Yeah, we're not saying don't have data. Have data to back up your claims, right? It's not op-eds. But just make sure that, and even in your op-eds, you should back up your claims. But just a reminder that this is an important journey. We're excited to see where you go with it. So don't let anybody tell you you can't do something.
Other questions?
Thank you so much for sharing about your work, your experiences, and educating us more on the communities that you work with. And I'm a little curious about how the communities you work with understand race, because in my own research, I'm finding that it's race that's present, but there's a hesitancy in the naming of race when people are explaining what's going on. So I'm curious if that's something y'all are facing in the work that you're doing.
Ben, were you able to hear that question? Okay. I don't know if anyone wants to start.
So I heard the question again, and my mind immediately went to this place of like, yes, academics constantly are trying to like name things from like in a top-down manner, than really hearing how folks are talking about these things in a very organic way, right? And so I don't want to say that we're quick to call everything name race all the time, but I love the word nuance. Like it's often, it may be race at the surface, but in practice, in our experience, it's often way more nuanced. And that's what you really have to listen for when you're talking to folks and hearing about the things that they experience. Because just calling it race is really too simple. It really doesn't get at what's going on here, because how race impacts a situation, I almost want to say how race colors the situation, right? Or racism colors a situation. It's not going to be the same from case to case to case. It could be the same person, and how they experience that from an interaction to interaction to interaction is going to be different. And so I think it's our job to make sure we're recording in the voices of the people we are working with in research, right? It's always in collaboration with. You're not working on any one community, right? You should be working with that community to produce the research. So really just hearing what they're saying and trying in our best ways to capture that in a way that can be understood by multiple audiences.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And I think to the question of whether or not at least the Southeast Asian community talk about race, right? I have similar experience. I think folks would describe what happened, right? But don't oftentimes label it as white supremacy or US militarism, right? I spent time with the Southeast Asian refugee man the other day in a 2 hours car ride. And he could name and describe US militarism all over the world, right? You talk about US interventions in Vietnam, US toppling governments all over the everywhere else, and that like led to the refugee crisis. But he didn't label it, white supremacy. He didn't call it US militarism, right? And I think there's a reason for that, right? I think oftentimes academia create these fancy language, right? Which can sometimes be beneficial to our community, right? As there's a way for us to finally describe what we are experiencing, right? But I also think that we shouldn't just let it limit us there, because I think oftentimes not all of us make it to academia, not all of us know how to describe certain experience, and we still live it, right? So I think similar to the panelists before, I agree, right? I think we need to listen to what our people are saying. We need to listen, even if they don't call it, you know, racialized capitalism. They're still talking about it. They're still living it.
Thank you. And just if I can quickly add, I agree with, you know, how people are expressing themselves or explaining themselves might not fit into the categories at academia, all of that. But I will also say that they're not to get into like the whole generational X and millennials and the boomers and all of that kind of stuff. But I gotta say, Generation Z just impresses me so much because they have the vocabulary and they're using it. And not all of them. I mean, I think it depends in the spaces that you're in, but then social media has definitely helped. But, you know, I have a 17-year-old and the things that he can articulate, there is no way at age 17 I can see the things that he'll say. And so they're clearly, I think the conversation is changing and young people are really seeing themselves in this story and taking the story back, which I find incredibly helpful and hopeful, and retelling the story in their own words. And again, these voices matter so much. It's no longer just sort of like the dominant perspective telling us what we should believe about our communities and groups of people. It's young people telling those stories themselves and getting up and finding avenues for solidarity. And that I feel like as hard as the last few years have been in this country, that has been my silver lining and my sort of like the hopeful takeaway, I guess.
Any other questions? Maybe time for one more. Anyone else? Question? Comments or thoughts? So I have one.
Moderator privilege.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest challenge for our youth today in terms of race, racialization?
I'll go. I'll just say that per the point about social media and having so much access, that I think in general, the world hasn't caught up yet. And so there's, you're able now to say, oh, there's like, I'm feeling this thing about my gender and I don't know, but like all of a sudden I have access to all of these people and spaces, for example, and I just flipped it from race, but like people who identify with multiple of my identities, and now we're all in this space and we can talk to each other. But then the minute you put the phone down or walk away from the screen and you look around, the world that we're in is, those things aren't as accessible anymore. And so then you go to school and the school does not have an affinity space for you, or the textbooks are still from 1995 and they haven't caught up, right, with all of the, again, access to information you have and the new ways of looking at things and all of this stuff, right? So I think that's a huge challenge for folks because it could feel very, not hopeless. I don't want to say they're without hope, but it's just like, how can I really be my full self if I don't have the space to do that in my daily life?
I think the biggest challenge right now for everybody is white supremacy, right? Because they're feeling the pushback, and so they're pushing back hard as well. And so the attack you're seeing on critical race theory or teaching about race in schools, all of those kinds of things, it's just, I think that's really hard for young people having to stand up and say that, no, this is not okay. Young people standing up to their parents. You may have heard about the kids in some, I can't remember where in Pennsylvania but there are several books that have been banned by their school, and the young kids stood up and said no. And these were kids from all sorts of backgrounds. It wasn't just kids of color. It was also white kids standing together and saying, no, we want to read about these. We want to understand these things. So I think that's just a huge, when white supremacy decides to take out more, it's a hard one because it's so insidious, as you said earlier.
No, and if I could just jump in, I mean, it's definitely something that I'm thinking about as I'm going to teach this course on race.
Yeah.
Right, it's very present for me as I introduce some materials. What kinds of pushback, what kinds of conversations we will have that will be difficult,
Especially as a woman of color, right?
especially as an immigrant woman, Muslim of color. Yes,
And young.
youngish.
I was so excited. I was excited about my white hair this morning. I noticed it on Zoom, and I was so excited. Maybe I'll give you some gravitas, and people will take me seriously.
Man,
Yeah, I think as you asked that question, I thought of when I was a sophomore in high school and when I, began this political consciousness journey. And I think when I learned about how messed up the world is at such a young age, I think it brought a lot of pain and also a lot of like hopelessness in a way. Like, wow, there's so many systems out there that need to be fixed, that need to be toppled, that need to, we need to build another system. And I think for the longest time, I didn't know. I didn't know. I just felt really hopeless. And then I went to study ethnic study in Berkeley, and that didn't really help, right? I just keep reading, racial theories and how our people are oppressed day after day, and I have to write about it, which is great because I didn't have anywhere else to articulate how these things impact my life, right? But yet, like, I feel like the reading and writing helped me, but I think the doing is the thing. And I think when I do youth organizing work in Philadelphia, I think, what I always ask myself, what is our responsibility, right, as youth organizer, right, to tell our young people, to teach our young people words that label their experience and to help build their political consciousness. What is our responsibility for their healing, right? Because I think they already live all of the experience that we are teaching them about, right? They're already living in these systems, right? But yet, like, what is the healing piece of all of this, right? And how are we responsible? Are we responsible for that, right? We give you the pill, and now you learn about how messed up the world is, and then what are we going to do with that, right? Are we going to give you opportunity to work on those things, to advocate for yourself, to organize in our community? Are we going to create healing spaces? And I think the latter part of that is often not talked about, right? And I think I see it in our young people, right? I think it's hard. It's hard to sit through and then realize that, there's a reason why Philadelphia public school is defunded. There's a reason why all these system is the way it is, right? So I think for me, the biggest challenge that I see in our young people is like, well, how do we heal in addition to all of the things that we talked about?
thank you so much. And I want to honor everyone's time. So I want to just say I'm so grateful to all three of you for joining us, particularly in this really, really hectic moment in our lives on campus in the semester. So I have deep gratitude for you all for taking time to join us and really just beginning this conversation, right? I mean, it's one that's incredibly complex and deep and nuanced, as has been mentioned before. And so I hope that you'll join us next semester to have more of these kinds of conversations with community leaders and scholars and activists, our colleagues in the city. So thank you very much. And I want to also say thank you to all of the partners in this course, which is Urban Studies, Laws, Africana, Sociology, and South Asia, as well as the Paideia program for sponsoring this course, which is really a thrill for me to be able to teach it. And I feel endlessly unqualified to really be teaching it, but I can begin conversations for you all next semester and join in the learning process as well. So join us also next Wednesday at 5 as we welcome 3 additional many, many thanks. Definitely reach out if anyone has questions. And I hope that you'll join us again next week. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone on Zoom as well. Thanks, man. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, man.